Do you ever look at successful people in your industry and you think, how did they get to be where they are? You're in the trenches with your business, putting out fires, and being where they are seems so out of reach. This is how I felt a few days ago when I interviewed Monique Shields. I wanted to have her on Content Jefe to discuss her successful podcast, Ambition Without Compromise. I changed my mind last minute and I decided to address the topic of how to build wealth and achieve success as a woman of color, running a business, or climbing the corporate ladder. She coaches CEOs and founders of 7- and 8-figure businesses who are exactly where you and I are right now. This is an episode you don't want to miss. Monique shares the qualities that women who have achieved some level of success in their businesses or careers have in common, and how to achieve balance and keep your sanity while you're building something big. We'll bring you this episode at no cost. The only thing that I ask you is that you share it with another entrepreneur who also may need this information. Oh, and before I forget, if you haven't signed up for my brand new mini course, Idea to Podcast Simplified, go sign up right now. It will give you the clarity to launch your podcast with strategy that gives you real ROI. Okay, now to Monique. Pod Sounds Cool presents Content Jefe, the podcast that helps online business owners make better content and more money. Let's Jefe up. Monique, you are a coach to women who are successful, women who are making 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, and who are founders, CEOs, the women that we look up to when we start on this journey. What is the difference between them making it and hitting all the marks and the goals, and some of us who struggle to get there, or somebody who's watching this right now and is thinking, I will never get there? Can somebody just throw me a piece of advice, or what's the path? What make these women to get to where they are? What's the secret to their success? So
the magical key.
If there's something magical.
There is no silver bullet. I will say that there's not like one magical thing that all these women are doing that everybody else just needs to do, and then we'll all be achieving all of our dreams. There are definitely a few things, but the thing that comes to mind first when I consider what really sets my clients apart, what is it that I observe in how they move and how they've accomplished things that maybe no one would have thought was possible for them, right? Beating the odds, is that they have a disregard for the rules. I think especially as women, we move through the world with so many rules about what we can and can't do, what we can and can't say. I think many of us have been raised to be nice and respectful. I think respect kind of gets in our way sometimes when it's like, I want to respect the way things are supposed to happen, the questions that I am allowed to ask, the rooms that I should or should not be stepping into, those situations where somebody has told you like, oh yeah, sure, go ahead and go for it. I've kind of given you a green light to take something a step further. And you're like, but can I really, right? We start imposing all of these false rules. And I think that women who break through to higher and higher levels of success, it's because they've decided, some of them are kind of built this way. You can tell they've been rebellious since they were children. But at some point, I think I'm more in the camp of, I was always a good girl kind of growing up. I didn't break the rules. I did not like to break the rules. I was always like that kid in line, like, come on, everybody stay in the line. I don't want to cut line or anything like that. But I grew into a woman that has become discerning around what rules actually are here to serve me and support my freedom and my creativity versus rules that are arbitrarily placed upon me to keep me nice and pleasant and in line. So I think that's the big thing.
You said that being a rule breaker, like some people are born like that. And some others, like you and I, it's something that it needs to be adopted and learned. Are you there, or are you still working on it? And how do you get to where you are?
Yeah, I don't think we ever fully escape our nature. Our defaults are kind of locked in, but I think that we can make what used to be maybe a very loud voice in our subconscious, it becomes quieter and quieter over time. And for me, and I think this is the case for a lot of women who maybe find a new path and make a big pivot in how they show up in the world as adults, is that there is something that occurs in your life that makes it all of a sudden very worth it. I think for some of us, we have to hit some kind of rock bottom, and it's like, oh, I have no choice. Like, when your back is up against the wall and you have no choice, you're either going to keep drowning or you're going to fight your way out. I think that can be a turning point for many people. For me, a big turning point was becoming a mother. I was in the trenches with my first baby and just realizing so many things about the world and so many things that actually don't matter, and realizing that my thriving was so incredibly important because there are so many things external to us that are trying to keep us tired. And you just can't afford anymore to not have priorities that really protect what matters most. And like what matters most becomes really clear in those moments in life where either your back is up against the wall, or like I said, for me, motherhood was a huge turning point where it's just like, no, I need to define my path going forward. That's when I started my business. That's when I said, I need to own my time. I need to own my schedule. I need to own my vision. I want to work with who I want to work with. I want to build as big as I want to. I want to release all the notions, all the fake rules that I've maybe been holding around what I can or can't do or shouldn't do. Yeah, that was what shifted it for me.
So, besides being rule breakers, what's another quality of these women?
So sometimes we think about like the road to success or the way it's presented externally, like looking at other people, right? We see people at their high points and it seems like some people are just shooting stars and they just climb and they hustle and they build. And what I have actually found to be the truth is that there's a long, I guess it's technically like a J curve, where if you imagine this like long tail of just consistent effort and the whole time just believing that all I have to do is be ready and be willing to take risks when the risk opportunity comes. But understanding that I might be in these trenches for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, not necessarily grinding and like killing yourself doing. I don't believe in that, especially at this age and stage of life. But that consistent effort, still showing up for your vision, your dream, feeding it, giving yourself a reason to keep believing in it each day. And it's like those small intentional steps, falling behind, getting back up, right? And then you're ready for that moment where it gets to pop and it skyrockets. And that's like where that J curve shoots up.
Mhm,
And I think that's the other thing. It's the belief that that shooting star moment is coming, but understanding that the road to get there is about consistent, sustained effort over time, and really just consistent, sustained recovery and resilience over time. Because it's never going to be like this perfect. Every day you like are at it and you're doing it in a perfect way. But it's
mhm,
about, I believe that I'm going to get back up and that this future belongs to me. I don't know
mhm.
exactly how it's going to come, but I just need to be ready for it. That is something that I definitely see in common with the women I work with.
This is also something where the majority of us start losing faith. It's not that we stop believing, is that if there's not a sign, you start getting tired, you start questioning yourself and your choices. And so having just this strong belief and faith, like unwavering faith that things will happen and that your goals will be fulfilled in the future. I think that this is where the majority of people just like, I'm just going
It's
to go back to
hard.
my 9 to 5.
It's so hard. It's hard. And it's a privilege in many cases to be able to do that, to sustain that and to stick with it. I have a supportive spouse at home. I talk about my privileges all the time, where I had months where it's like, okay, I don't know where the revenue's coming from, but I didn't have to worry about, is there going to be food on the table, where that's not available to everyone.
Mhm,
So it's also not like something to shame yourself over if you feel like life is just too heavy for you right now to feel like you can maintain that faith and belief. But
mhm.
I hope that there are ways that we can all find opportunity to like strengthen our faith and to come back into inspiration and find some motivation to keep going.
So we have the disregard of the rules, this unshakable belief that things will happen and that I just have to show up and keep going. Those two are the traits that you've seen in successful women. What about you can't do it alone? I've listened to a few of your episodes in preparation for me for this interview, and you talked about community, building a community, and finding support in a community. Could you share a little bit of that with us?
So, one thing I will say, and I think, obviously my work focuses mostly on women and women of color in particular. I think that most of us don't actually initially build this way. I think that we have been taught to be strong and to be independent and to not need things from other people, to count on ourselves. And we rely on that. And I think youth can be on your side
Mhm,
when you have the energy to do it that way. And so I just want to make sure I caveat that there isn't like, and the people who really achieve success, especially the women that I'm talking about, they do it because they're in strong community. I do think that women that have sustained success, I think Beyonce is the ultimate example of this in many ways. She hasn't flown off the rails with the massive success that she's experienced in the world. I think a lot of it is you can draw lines back to the fact that her family is with her every step of the way. Her mother is a huge part of her brand, and she always talks about her as a part of her anchoring. She's got Kelly and the other girls from Destiny's Child. Like she has a tribe around her, even though she's in this upper echelon of fame and success. I think that's what can keep you. But I do believe, at least from what I've seen, that most of us don't actually invest in community up front. But then something happens, or maybe maybe you achieve a level of success where you look up and recognize how alone you are,
Hmm.
and community becomes the necessity. And I think that's where there's a real opportunity to redefine what it means to find success. Because what's the point of being up here if you're all by yourself? You
Hmm.
can't enjoy the success with anyone else when you're alone. And so one of the things that I really believe in, like slow and steady building, I think especially for women in their 30s and 40s and 50s who are maybe building companies, building out their visions, that we don't have to do it the way that some of like other, younger folks are doing it, where it's like maybe they have the energy to compensate for this.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't. So I lean on community for lots of things, certainly for opportunities and ideas. As a matter of fact, tomorrow I have a girlfriend coming over and we do these quarterly dream sessions where we get together, we just dream together, and it's not like a strategy session initially. It's not like let's map anything out. It's just share with me like what you think you want. And then we think very differently and we see each other. You need your blind spots filled by somebody who really believes in you and gets you. And so we'll offer each other different vantage points around what's possible. So a lot of times I might be dreaming with a limitation and she sees right through it. And it's just like, well, why don't you just put Oprah in there? Like, or whatever
Hmm.
the thing might be. Like she always adds that Oprah effect, I'll say.
Hmm.
And then the same with me, like I see the superstar in her. I see the dreamiest parts of her. And so I think having these kinds of people in my life, she's not the only person that I move with in this way. I think it compensates for the all-night grind and like I don't have that in me anymore. It's not a part of the model for success at this stage of life for me. And so these moments help to skyrocket my energy, skyrocket my inspiration and vision. And then I have like-minded people who also have levels of success in their own right. And so we're also able to make connections and opportunities for each other. So it really works together in these really gorgeous ways if you allow other people in to be with you on the journey, even in
Hmm.
the planting of the seeds before you even get started on a thing. Somebody that you trust, some people that you trust, it can make a huge difference.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And just the fact that we are meeting here and that we're having this conversation, and that now, if you're a coach, you have your students, you have also people who are within your community as well that you can reach out. And it's not only needed, it's also part of staying sane and not losing your sanity, because we are working from home and we don't get to see other people very often. We're just day in and day out working from our offices, and we don't have that one-on-one interaction. Like it can be like 3 4 days and we haven't seen a person. So
Yeah,
so it's needed for our growth, for the growth of our business, and also for our sanity.
100%. It's like we
Hmm.
also just as humans need other humans around.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
do. We do. Do you think that to get to that level of success, and when we talk about success, it may be a different definition for different people, but
Mm.
just to get to where you are, where you're making, 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, do you think that you have to make some kind of sacrifice or compromise to get to that point? Or can you get to that level of success without compromising or sacrificing?
Yeah, I think the first thing you said there, and it's everything that my podcast even hinges on, which is you have to actually define what success means to you in a really specific and personal way. Because I think sometimes we confuse sacrifice for suffering and we'll enter into periods of suffering that are completely unnecessary because we're pursuing a definition of success that was never ours. And then we'll call it sacrifice. And it's like, no, sacrifice is meant to be directed and short term. And it's for something that you feel really connected to and clear on, as opposed to like, I need to hit the next 7 figures or 8 figures, like I just need to. And it's like, why? Are you clear on why and how and
Mhm.
who you want to be when you get there and like how that connects to your actual values and the life you want to lead, the legacy you want to leave behind? Are you really clear on the full picture of that? Sacrifice is required. Period. Like there are no shortcuts in life, but I do think that we get to design what sacrifice means for us if we allow ourselves to, right? Because I think we need to have a basement on that. Like some things are not worth it. For me, like I said, the catalyst to even starting a business is like, I want to own my time. Why? Because I want to feel free to do mom shit. Like I want to
Mhm.
be present with my children. I went on a bus full of first graders to the
Mhm.
San Diego Zoo a few weeks ago for my daughter's class, but I was able to do that because I own my time and I didn't have to ask ask anybody and I didn't have to worry. Like money is still coming in because of how I built my business, as opposed to if I'm building towards 7 figures, 8 figures, and doing so in a way that compromises my ability to do that, then like, what are we doing here? Because that was
Mm-hmm.
the whole point. So I think us getting clear really on the not only the destination, like the definition of that success, 'cause you never really arrive at a place anyway, and then backtrack into like who we want to be on that path. I think that matters a whole lot more than worrying about whether or not you have to sacrifice, because you'll do what you need to do to honor those values and it will feel worthy. It will feel aligned. It won't feel like suffering. Success is such a fickle and weird thing. I was at a conference the other day and one of the speakers said something that rang so true to me, which is that the more successful you get, the more successful people you're around. And the more successful people you're around, the less successful you feel. And it goes
Mm-hmm.
on and on. So like you never feel like you reach the top if that's what's defining success for you. It's like, oh, there's more people who have more. So I should just want more. That'll never end. And then you'll be miserable and that's suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's how I think about it.
Wow. Yeah, that's really profound. And I think your definition of success, it's different from somebody else's definition of success, and having that clear in your mind why you're doing what you're doing and what success mean to you. It's important before you get sucked into anything really, because when you don't know what you want, when you don't know what are your goals and why you are starting your business to begin with, then you can lose sight of that main goal. And I see that too. I started my own business because I didn't want to be away from my children. So sometimes when I get frustrated because I have these ideas that I should be at a place that I'm not right now, and then I think, oh, well, but look around you. You know, you're able to share your time with your kids. You're able to be here when they come home from school, and that's what you wanted. And yeah, things are moving slow, but right here, you're just planting a lot of good seeds and you're there for them. And I didn't have that growing up. I was by myself. My mom was working all the time. So I'm able to be there for my kids, not missing out on a lot of things.
It's both and, right? Like I started my business, I set these goals with the idea that I wanted the freedom to be present with my family. And I am an ambitious person and I get
Hmm.
lit up. I have all kinds of ideas. And sometimes all of the time and family demands on my life, the obligations I have, also it frustrates me sometimes because I still want to do those things. And
Hmm.
so I don't think that just honor the full experience of that. Like it's not always easy to just be like, yes, and yes, I do get to spend time with my children. So I should just be happy with that. It's like I
Hmm.
don't think it's that simple. Like you also deserve to give yourself grace in that tension between I do want to be here for them. I do know and feel a deep sense of gratitude for the presence that I get to have with my kids. Like you said, my mom, when I grew up, was working all the time because she was just trying to make ends meet or whatever the story is, right? And
Hmm.
so I recognize the gratitude, the privilege I have. And sometimes I just want to oh my gosh, I have this idea. I wish I could just spend all day and all night or all week working on this thing and I can't.
Hmm.
And that
Yeah.
is like also true. Both can be
Hmm.
true at the same time. And it's not always an easy dance. But I think it's like over the long term, when you get to look back, I think of things in like a 60-40. Like 60% of the time, can you look back and say, I did honor the highest value of family for me, even though it was sometimes frustrating. And
Hmm.
that's great.
Definitely, like those days when you're working into a project and then it's 2 o'clock, 2:30, and you have to go get your kids. So it's like, oh, well,
Yeah.
this is what I sign up for. But there's a lot of things that are expected from us as women too, when it comes to raising the kids, when it comes to managing the home, and also having a business and having clients and being also somehow not responsible. Like in some cases, when you have the support of your husband and you can have that, not being so stressed about where the money is going to come or why the business is not hitting certain money goals for me to live comfortably and without stress. How do you get to a point where you are successful with your business and also finding that balance with managing a home and also being a spouse and also having kids? Can you achieve balance, or are you going to be dropping the ball in your business or as a mother or as a partner?
Okay. So first of all, I love the fact that you use the language dropping the ball. I don't know if I've mentioned this book to you before, but there's a book called Drop the Ball. Have I told you about this before?
No.
I love this book. I tell every mother I ever meet to read this book. It's a book called
I'm
Drop
going
the
to.
Ball. Yes, it's fantastic. It's by a woman named Tiffany Dufu. She is incredibly ambitious and she's dedicated her whole life to like women's empowerment, leadership development. She's a startup founder now. She's got like all kinds of things going on in the world. But anyway, I had a chance to meet her and hear her speak, bought her book and was like enthralled. And there's a lot in this book, so definitely check it out. But one of the main things that she talks about in there, the title tells you, Drop the Ball, is basically you having to get to a point of recognition that you cannot keep all the balls in the air and that trying to do so is just going to kill you over time. When you think about the notion of dropping the ball, it feels like this impossible thing to do. It's like, I can't, but I can't because all of these things matter, right? It's not like, well, I've just
Mhm.
decided I'm not taking the kids to school anymore.
Yeah.
They'll have to find their way there. Like that's not an option, right? But what she does, I think, in this book is telling you through some personal examples in her own life, recognizing because she also has a very ambitious spouse as well, and recognizing that there were balls that she was keeping in the air that she did not have to do. One of the things that she talks about is just requiring more help from your spouse. Like sometimes we won't even ask because they won't do it the way we will, and
Mhm.
they won't. And you have to get okay with that. And then recognize what does that give you? There were also all of these things she was talking about that she was doing for her kids that she realized were like superfluous. It's hard to say. Superfluous because it was like, I'm trying to be like the, Pinterest perfect Susie
Mhm.
homemaker mom. And it's like, does this even really matter when I think about like the values of my life and like what it is that I'm trying to build, like my true legacy, my true values? Does any of this even matter? And so one of the things that she did, and this is a beautiful exercise, anyone who's a parent out there who's struggling with this, please take notes right now,
Mhm.
which is to ask your kids. Even a kid as young as 2 years old, 3 years old can
Mhm.
tell you, what is it that mommy does? What is it that daddy does that makes you feel loved? That makes you
Mhm.
feel, because that's what we're like sometimes endlessly trying to do these things to show our love, to shower our kids, like show them presence and care. And half of it does not even matter to them. Like what counts to a 9-year-old who's into X, Y, and Z and has whatever personality type is completely different than what matters to a 4 or 5-year-old who's into, whatever they're into and how they relate to you. And sometimes we're just making shit up because we haven't asked them and we don't think that they know, but they do. And for
Mhm.
her, in the example in the book was that at this stage of life, her kids were younger when she wrote this book, but she asked them. And one of the things that they both said was like, well, when you make us scones every Saturday morning, she's like
Mm.
big into baking. And she was like, that's
Mhm.
it. She's like, I've been doing all this other crap, like beyond just like, okay, I could keep my kids clean and fed and,
Mhm.
housed and educated. Beyond that, she was doing all this stuff that didn't matter. And when she asked her kids what does matter, it was just like, Mommy, I want to know that my mom has made me scones. This is like a way that she shows them love
Mhm.
every Saturday morning. And so she said it freed her up to stop placing this mom guilt on herself every time she needed to travel or be away or have extra time to think through her projects or do her writing or whatever it is that she was working on. Because for that season of life, and there's just something you can check in with your kid on like every 6 months, every year, whatever makes sense, every quarter, I don't know. But for that period of time until their next check in, her main job was to make sure those scones come hell or high water. So if she had to freeze them and have somebody else get them into the
Mhm.
oven so those things are ready for her babies on Saturday morning, that's what she did. Read the book.
I
I've
will.
told so many people about this book, I should like, I don't know, I should get a cut of this at some point. But
I will. I
but I think
will.
it speaks to, I think in many ways, the excess that we're doing as women to be pleasing, to feel like we're valuable, to find love, even through our children. This could show up how we're working with our teams, how we're working with our spouses. And because you can ask your spouse the same thing. There are probably a lot of things
Mm.
you're doing, like, this is how I'm showing my love and care and attentiveness. And it's like, they don't even, I don't know, the one thing that they matters to them is this. And it's like, oh, that's all I need to be focused on right
Mhm.
now? Okay. I think cutting the corners in that way can really make a difference with finding this more harmonious existence. I don't think we ever find perfect balance, but I think that's helpful.
I feel like no matter what you do, like sometimes it's just this feeling of not doing enough.
Mhm.
Of that you are letting somebody down, that you're even letting your kids down or your spouse down, or that you are missing out on opportunities that you are not where you should be. And sometimes it's overwhelming. And like from the outside, it may look like you have it together, but nobody knows like when you go to bed at night, the way you feel. And it's just sometimes it's overwhelming, like the feeling of letting the people around you down for some reason. Like, I don't know if every woman out there can identify with this feeling, but it's like, when am I gonna go to bed and say, Veronica, good job? You did well today. There's
Yeah.
dishes in the sink. That's okay. By the time you went to kiss your kids goodnight, they were already asleep and you didn't had much interaction with your teenagers today. But
Mm.
like it's okay. And maybe you miss out on an opportunity at work, and that's okay too. But it's just like this constant feeling of not measuring up, of letting people down. Do you feel like that sometimes?
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's a constant battle because, like I was talking about before, we have these defaults, and I think socially as women, we're raised to never be enough. Every
Hmm.
like cultural signal we have is like, you're not strong enough, pretty enough, nice enough, smart. Like you'll never achieve this impossible, invisible threshold of enough. And
Hmm.
so we bring that into all of our relationships. We bring that to our to-do list. We bring that to our children. We bring that, everything we do, it's just never enough. And I think the more that we can remind ourselves that feeling is not something that came from in here, that it's in the atmosphere and it's a trick. It's not real. It is a trick. It is what keeps capitalism capitalizing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because we just need to be endlessly productive. So what keeps women controlled because it keeps us concerned with always never feeling like if we're enough. Because if we always give in to that, then we're easy to control, right? It's harder for us to make money and to feel focused and grounded and balanced. So I always say that step one really is reminding yourself in those moments that this is bullshit. The reason I feel this way is not because of something wrong in here. I'm not lacking a thing. It is the impossible demands that are being placed on my life that I have to reject. And
Hmm.
then there are like tactical things we can begin to do with how we're thinking about the actual to dos on our list that are stacking up because most of it doesn't actually matter day to day.
Hmm.
And then having processes, I think this is a great way to invite community. If you have somebody I have friends who are just extremely efficient and discerning when it comes to how they spend their time and what they end up doing. And I've had times when like an extreme overwhelm where I'm just like, can we just talk about all these things that I have in my head? And can you help me hash through them? I've sat down with my husband and talked about some of this stuff sometimes too. And he's really good. He's hyper efficient. So if you have somebody like that in your life, I think that can help unburden you because we also end up carrying it alone. And that adds to the shame you feel. And that just,
Hmm.
yeah, then you're going to cry yourself to sleep every other night because it is too much to feel that way. It's overwhelming. So yeah, but first step is to remember it's not yours. It's not
Hmm.
your fault. You're being set up. And so we reject that.
Like sometimes I just look at my husband and he's just like snoring and having his
Oh,
best
peacefully.
sleep. So, and then I ask him like the following morning, like, do you, he's like, the kids are okay? And then I asked them and they're like perfect. And so I feel like you said, like, there's these ideas that are placed in our mind. For me to be the perfect mother, like I have to set these different goals and different things to do every day. So the house is clean, so the kids are fed, so they know that I love them. And there's time for me to sit down and have deep conversations and make sure that my teenagers are doing okay. And then play with my 5-year old and then cook for my husband. And then, all of these things that I don't know where they will place in my head. And it's been a journey for me to get rid of some of those things. And my husband has helped me a little bit with that because he's very supportive and he doesn't mind to roll up his sleeves and do things for me. But once again, I don't ask for what I need because I think I can do it all. When it comes to money, when it comes to building a business and setting our prices, and how much of that is those beliefs and being a woman and being a woman of color. And I ask you this because I work with women of color as well. And I've seen the struggle of them asking for the skills that they're bringing to the table,
Right.
the experience that they're bringing to the table. Have you found that in the women that you work with?
Absolutely. I don't think anyone was absolved of that feeling as women, and especially I think as women of color. And I do also think, yeah, it has everything to do with belief because when you think about what's actually taking place when you have to articulate your value, why you should pay me X, Y, and Z money, why this thing should cost as much as it does, what the investment should be, you have to articulate that value from a place of solidness, of confidence. So if you yourself have been made from all these signals in the world throughout your life to feel as though you need to prove your value, that you don't inherently have value, so that every room you have to step into, you need to make sure that you look a certain way, that you speak a certain way, that you do everything as perfectly as you possibly can to prove this value that you definitely, air quote, do not have. If that has been the message that has been placed on you throughout your life, then when it comes to a sales conversation and it's time to now ask for your services, your skills, your talents, everything that you bring to the table to now be met with a value that is equitable, it becomes this very tricky emotional place to navigate because that's not what most of us have experienced throughout our time in lives. us. We're battling against a lot of these messages and these beliefs that have been placed in us, I believe, every time we think about what our values should be. I've been a manager in a few different capacities. And so then I've been on the other side of compensation conversations with all kinds of people. I had white guys on my team, guys of color. I've had white women of color, like all the whole rainbow, right? And there is a huge difference. There's definitely a gendered difference when we talk about like a cisgender male coming to those conversations. And I know we've seen some of the statistics about this, but I felt like I've experienced this live with just what men feel comfortable just immediately asking for, not with a bunch of PowerPoint presentations and all of these special, beautiful images and, to make sure that they feel like it's just like, this is just what I want. I think I'm awesome. You should too. So how can we make this happen? Give me the
Mhm.
dollars. And there's just like a nonchalant relaxedness because if you haven't been raised your entire life to have to prove your basic value, then you believe already, I have some inherent value. So that's how I move when I'm asking someone to pay me for something. Whereas
Mhm.
with women or non binary folks who I've also worked with, it's a lot more challenging because the world has
Mhm.
told you you're not valuable. So it's an uphill battle from the jump.
Yeah. So, how do you coach somebody through that when you see them and there's this big disparity between the skills that they bring to the table and what they offer and the price that they are going by? Their services or whatever they're offering. There's just this disparity. How do you coach them through that?
So there's a couple of different things that might be at play. One of the things I used to do in my past, I worked with MBA programs in the Bay Area and did career coaching with them. So they're talking with these big companies about positions that they might want. And I worked with a number of women of color who sought me out to work with me because specifically because I was a Black woman. They were like, I think you understand what I'm going through when I step into these negotiations. And one of the first things we have to do oftentimes is just like, because we're living in an imaginary world of just feelings. And so everything is reactionary. And what we have to do is get out of that place and get into some data. So what does the market command? Can you get a sense of what else is out there? What is the range? Let's just for a moment try to get the emotions out of this and just look at what the truth is. Can we see what other people are charging? Okay. Then there's this whole, and I tend to not like get into a battle with you on like why you should, girl, and believe in yourself and you're worth it. Like
Yeah.
that's not enough.
Yeah. No.
If you're coming to work with me, you have to be willing to engage in some experimentation that's going to feel confronting because I'm going to dare you to do shit that scares you. And so
Mhm.
what comes after that one is just like, okay, so now we can stop the nonsense about like what is possible because we've seen actual data of what is possible. We've asked around, we figured it out. We've got a few numbers that maybe are higher than what you've been thinking about. Okay, so now we're just going to pretend like these voices inside of you don't really exist. And we're going to come up with an experiment for you to take an emotional risk and just ask for the number. So I'll have people get to a point where it's like, I don't want you having a number where it's just like your mind is about to implode. But it should make you feel uncomfortable. Like we should be
Mhm.
bumping up. So usually a woman will say a number to me, or they'll say like a range. They'll say like, for instance, if it's like, okay, well, I'm looking for like 30 to 35% more. So I'll say, so it sounds like 35% is more ideal, maybe even 40%. And then they'll have some recoil and usually, and they get scared. And I'm like, great, that's the number. So let's practice saying it out loud. And this is something that anyone can do where it's just like, I just need to get my nervous system used to this. I have the data. Now I've just got to get my body to cooperate with me. I've got to get these words out of my mouth so that my body is comfortable expressing them. So you might try this with, your friends or partner or somebody like that. And then the dare is to go and say it out loud and see what happens. Because a big part of this as well, and the last piece of this is imagining what's the worst that will happen. Because I think sometimes we also have these imaginary, like, and then they're going to hate me and they're going to think I'm so greedy and terrible and selfish and this and that. We have to have a whole conversation around, well, is that true? What evidence do you have for that? Right. Which typically we have none. It's just our fears talking. So yeah, once you've shown yourself and you've gotten your body used to it and you've given yourself a little bit of evidence, you've kind of walked yourself through the scary scenarios that are playing out in your mind, usually you have just enough courage to try it at least once. And once you've done it one time, you're good. Because then you recognize there's been a false ceiling here that I've placed upon myself and I'm not going to let myself do this again. We might still do it
Mhm.
again and the stakes get higher. Every time it's like scarier to raise your rate again or to ask for more again, but it becomes less and less scary over time.
Monique, why do you do what you do? Why are you so invested and passionate and show up on your podcast and show up for women? Can you tell me, like, how did that start? Why did it start? Was it something personal or is it a calling? Like, how did that happen?
I love this question because it is deeply personal. My business is like my own healing. I think I see a reflection of myself in the clients that I work with
Mhm.
in various ways, depending on who the woman is. But I see myself in them because I lived, like I said, the majority of my young life and young adult life trying to play by rules and then feeling very stuck. I was underemployed for a number of years. And I remember the day that I left my last like corporate job and I told my boss who was in the C-suite at the time, I was like, yeah, we're going to be moving across country and I'm leaving and this is the date I want to, had that whole exit conversation. And he was like, oh, I was kind of wondering when this was going to happen. Like he said something to the effect of like, I've always thought that you were too smart to be here or to be doing this or to stay here at this level. And that's always kind of stuck with me. And I was like, well, why? That's interesting. I've never heard him say anything like that before. And I was like, why is that? And so anyway, I've tied this back to, for me, what I've realized over time in various situations, relationships, even getting married to my spouse who's terribly ambitious, was that I didn't feel comfortable with what I wanted. And I didn't feel safe feeling fully expressed and claiming my own vision. I was always looking for something else to like, I'll just carry somebody else's vision and I'll work really hard there. And like, that'll be my role in life. Like, I wanted to be like the vice president of everything
Mhm.
or the chief of staff of everything or something like that. I wanted to
Mhm.
always play in this like supportive role, which I think can be wonderful if that is the truth for you, as opposed to that's a hiding place. And for me, I
Mhm.
recognized that was a hiding place for me. And so, yeah, I think that there's this calling in me to make sure that this doesn't carry on for other women who are at all kinds of levels in their work and lives and maybe hiding from the truth of what they want and letting any of these false narratives, rules, beliefs hold them back.
Mhm.
Because I always thought I could never be an entrepreneur, right? I always wanted to stay in someone else's shadow, and that felt comfortable to me, not empowering. And so
Mhm.
that's a big part of the connection.
Could you share from the clients that you worked with the story or the transformation or the evolution of somebody you have worked with that it touched you deeply? I feel
Mm.
like when we do what we do, when we try to teach other people our skills so they can accomplish things, there's this moment that it makes you feel like I am on the right path. You can see the transformation, you can see what the person is capable of doing because you were part of their journey and you just feel so blessed and so full of purpose.
Mhm.
Could you share a story of one of your clients?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So, as you were speaking, one of the client stories that came to mind immediately is a woman that I was working with who was in a really rough spot. She had a very non traditional background, let's just say, for working in a startup or just non traditional business background, period. But she had risen through the ranks. She was like very homegrown, risen through the ranks and kind of achieved the impossible and was now up for a C suite role. And all of these things were happening within the organization that were big challenges that she was pulled in to tackle, but then she ended up becoming the scapegoat. And it ended up being a really not great moment for her. And without getting into too much detail, because there's like legalities, but one of the things that I felt so there's two parts to this. There was the moment where everything hit, like the shit hit the fan for her, basically. And I had a relationship with her at the time where, my private clients who I work with one on one, they have like access to me just random hours if they need me. And she sent me this text about how the shit had hit the fan and how she really needed help. And this is not something that will typically happen in terms of like what I'm doing with my clients, but I was able to connect her with a woman in my network, not a client, just like a friend of mine who had gone through something very similar. And we got her suited and booted and like all of the legal things that were happening that where she was really being taken advantage of, like this really kind of terrible situation, and helping her realize because she wasn't asking questions. She was like, maybe I should kind of take this laying down and just like let it happen and like maybe it'll go away and I'll figure things out and I'll find my next whatever needs to happen. And we taught her how to fight. And I think that sticks out in my memory because now she is the founder of her own startup and she comes from the most unlikely background, like high school diploma. She's doing incredible things in the world. And it's less about even the titles that she carries and what she's come through, and more so about how she shows up now. She will never let anyone place her in that situation like she was before. And I think it's because I was able to not just with myself, but like create a buffer around her to rally around her and protect her in that moment to help her see herself differently, to see herself as someone who is worthy of being protected and fighting for. she's a completely different woman now, and she's running her own thing, and she's setting her own terms, and she understands how she deserves to be treated and who she deals with and who she does not. That kind of a moment of being able to meet a client and see their strength grow and how they love on themselves, that grow, that's like the most meaningful thing that I could ever be a part of.
Wow, that's beautiful. So, for those of us who don't have a Monique around, what would be your best advice? How to find that courage within yourself to deal either with something that seems so impossible to deal with, or to deal with the day to day demands of what you're doing? What would be your best advice?
Well, without knowing the specifics of what any individual is dealing with, I think with women, many times the answer is to stop trying to deal with it. I think that what we'll do is we will over personalize things around us that actually don't work for us. And what I want to encourage any woman, whoever hears my message, whoever connects with me in any way, whether we coach together or not, I want them to feel deeply is that we don't tolerate what is eating away at us. We don't tolerate overwhelm. We don't tolerate, to the best of our ability, to tell ourselves that this is something that is actually not tolerable. It's not something I need to rise to. You don't need to get bigger. You don't need to get better. You don't need to get more energy. You don't need to get stronger. That's not the problem. Most women I know, especially I think women of color, because that's who I work with the most, we're strong enough. That's not the problem. It's not that your strength is a problem. If anything, you could do with being less strong. That's not the problem. To stop looking internally for problems and to start looking around and saying, no, this doesn't work for me. And I don't want to tolerate it anymore. What balls can I drop? Read that book. If you're a mom, especially, but read that book. What balls can I drop? What requests can I begin to make? And how can I begin to treat myself with the highest regard, higher than my children, higher than my spouse, higher than my employees, higher than my team, higher than everyone else? How can I get myself back into that place? To start there first and to get as creative as you can. And if you can't do that by yourself, and I think many of us can't, especially if you're already kind of burnt out and overwhelmed, you've got to find someone to talk to. If it's not a therapist or a coach or someone like that's in your corner, you've got to find that trusted individual, someone else that you admire when you're at different maybe industry events and things like that. And you meet someone who seems like really interesting and cool and has enough of overlapping identities and life experience and business experience to open up about a problem that you're facing, because you need creative solutions. Oftentimes we just can't see the creative solution in front of us because we have our own blind spots and we're like swimming in our own stuff. Step one is to not tolerate it and to stop trying to make yourself better. You're not the problem. 9 times out of 10, you're not the problem. The stuff around you is the problem. Start there.
Thank you. It's been amazing to talk to you today and to talk about issues that are so real when it comes to building our businesses and keeping our sanity and keeping balance between raising kids and having a family and trying to find success and fulfillment in what we do. I appreciate your time and you being here with me today. And thank you, Monique.
Thank you so much, Rock. It's been a pleasure. Anytime.
Share with us about where we can find you. You have an amazing podcast that I've been listening to. I was saying, like, for those who don't have Monique in their lives, then you can have Monique in your life because she has a podcast.
Thank you. Yes, definitely check out my podcast. It's called Ambition Without Compromise. It is my favorite creative outlet and endeavor. And it really is meant to be that. Like, I can't coach everyone in the world anyway, right? I'm just one person, but I want that to be a place where you feel like you can come and listen to episodes and actually walk away with something, not just like loose inspiration, but actually something that you can do differently or a different take that you can have in framing on what you're facing. And outside of that, I am Monique R. Shields on Instagram. So you can also find me there. Want to connect on LinkedIn? I'm kind of there every now and then, but mostly Instagram and my podcast.
And you can find all those links in the description of this episode or in the show notes. And with that, thank you. And thank you, Monique.
Thank you.
Mira, did you like the episode? I hope you enjoyed it. You can find the links to subscribe to Monique's podcast, Ambition Without Compromise, in the description of this episode. You can also follow Monique on Instagram at Monique R. Shields. And until next time, jefe up, my friend.